Sarah had always believed she had a perfect life. Married for 5 years to John, she took pride in the home they had built together and the happy memories they shared. But this illusion was brutally shattered on a rainy spring afternoon. It was like any other day. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing John's favorite dinner when she heard the front door open. Her heart leaped with joy, expecting to see him walk in with that warm smile that always made her feel safe. But what she found was a cold and distant expression on her husband's face. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tense and devoid of emotion. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. His tone was unlike anything she'd heard before. Trying to conceal her growing panic, she sat down at the table, wiping her hands on her apron. "John, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling with concern. John couldn't meet her eyes. Instead, he stared blankly at a point on the floor. I'm in love with someone else." The words came out like knives, cutting straight through Sarah's heart. It felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath her feet. What? What do you mean, John? We have a marriage, a life together." "I know," he replied, finally lifting his gaze. "But I can't keep lying anymore. I've fallen in love with your sister." The shock was so intense that Sarah could barely process the words. Her own sister? The betrayal was doubly painful. It wasn't just her husband who had betrayed her, but her own flesh and blood, someone she loved and trusted deeply. "You need to leave, Sarah. I need to move on with her," John continued, his words sounding even more cruel with their calculated coldness. Sarah's world crumbled in that moment. The home she had built, the dreams she shared with John, all turned to dust in an instant. She felt humiliated, betrayed, and utterly devastated. Tears began to stream down her face as reality set in with all its cruelty. "John, please, don't do this to me," she begged, but he just shook his head, relentless. "It's already decided, Sarah. You need to leave today." With nowhere to go and her heart in tatters, Sarah packed her things with trembling hands and a numb mind. Every item she placed in the suitcase was a painful reminder of what she was losing. Her home, which had once been a sanctuary of love and security, now felt like a strange and hostile place. With tears burning her eyes and a deep pain ripping through her chest, Sarah walked out the front door without looking back. It felt like her heart was being ripped from her chest. The pain was unbearable. The rain, which had once seemed like a soothing sound, now seemed to reflect her internal state. Complete chaos, a storm of emotions threatening to engulf her sanity. The rain continued to fall, each drop seeming to reflect the sadness flooding Sarah's heart. Her hands trembled as she drove down the dark, winding road that led to her grandmother's house. The place that once represented peace and happiness was now her last refuge, a shelter to lick her wounds and try to find a fragment of herself. Upon reaching her destination, Sarah parked the car and sat for a few minutes, staring at the old house through the rain-streaked window. With a tight heart, she finally gathered the courage to step out. The key turned in the lock with a familiar click, but the sound echoed painfully in the night silence. Entering, Sarah was greeted by a gloomy and dusty environment. The smell of dampness and abandonment was overwhelming. Every piece of furniture covered in white sheets seemed like a ghost from the past, reminding her of the happy days spent there, of her grandmother's warm laughter and hugs. Now the house seemed to reflect her own soul, empty and full of pain. Sarah lit some candles since the electricity wasn't working, casting flickering shadows on the peeling walls. She began to wander through the rooms, each step an effort not to completely fall apart. In the room that had once been hers, she opened a suitcase and began to unpack her things with slow, automatic movements. As she organized her belongings, the reality of her situation solidified with increasing brutality. The loneliness was overwhelming. Sitting on the old bed, she hugged a pillow and cried silently, hot tears rolling down her cheeks. The feeling of abandonment and betrayal was overwhelming, a black hole threatening to consume whatever hope remained. Tired and emotionally drained, Sarah finally lay down, but sleep didn't come easily. Thoughts swirled in her mind, memories of the love she thought she had, of the trust that was brutally destroyed. Amidst the despair, she decided she needed to react. She couldn't let John and her sister completely destroy her life. The next day, still feeling the weight of the previous night, Sarah began to clean. Each task felt like a battle against discouragement. Dusting the furniture, cleaning the windows and trying to bring some life to the environment. It was a painful process but necessary. As she scrubbed the tiles in the kitchen, a wave of nausea hit her. Confused and weak, Sarah leaned on the sink trying to take deep breaths. The nausea slowly passed, leaving her even more tired. But it was a sign, a small indication that something else was happening inside her. In the days that followed, Sarah realized that the feeling of sickness persisted. Something was wrong, or maybe right in an unexpected way. She took a pregnancy test, her heart racing as she waited for the result. When the double line appeared, confirming her suspicions, Sarah felt an avalanche of emotions. Joy, fear, and profound sadness mingled, creating a sense of internal chaos. She sat on the kitchen floor, hugging her knees as she tried to process what it meant. She was alone, betrayed, and pregnant. What would she do now? Where would she go? The tears returned with full force, but deep in her heart, a small flame of hope began to shine. She still had something to fight for, someone who depended on her. Sarah decided she needed help. But from whom? The answer came unexpectedly when a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Michael, the neighbor gardener. He was surprised to see her there, and even more so to notice her fragile state. "Sarah, are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. She tried to smile, but the pain was written on her face. I don't know what okay is anymore," she replied, her voice broken. Michael came in, offering help that Sarah didn't even know she needed. He started cleaning with her, bringing supplies, and most importantly, listening. Each passing day, Michael's presence became a foundation for Sarah, a silent but constant support. But John's shadow still loomed over her, a silent threat that couldn't be ignored. What would he do when he found out about the pregnancy? And how could Sarah protect herself, protect her baby, from new betrayals and sufferings? The days at her grandmother's house began to follow a peculiar rhythm. Sarah spent the mornings cleaning, organizing, and trying to turn the place into a home. In the afternoons, Michael would show up, always with a gentle smile and a willingness to help. He brought tools, food, and most importantly, a calming presence that Sarah so desperately needed. But as the house slowly regained its old charm, something new and unexpected grew inside Sarah. The persistent nausea, constant fatigue, and intensified feelings brought her to a state of alert. The confirmation of her pregnancy had changed everything. She was bringing a new life into the world, a piece of herself and tragically also of John. One afternoon, while organizing the old attic, Sarah found a box of her grandmother's keepsakes. Yellowed photographs, love letters, and small objects that told the story of a life well lived. Among these memories, she found a diary. She sat on the dusty floor and began to read, absorbing the words of the woman who had always been her source of strength and wisdom. The diary told stories of love and loss, of moments of intense joy and deep pain. Sarah felt a powerful connection to those pages, as if her grandmother were by her side, whispering words of comfort and encouragement. What touched her most was a passage about facing adversity with courage and faith. As she read, silent tears streamed down her face. The pain of being betrayed by John and her sister, the uncertainty of the future, and the responsibility of raising a child alone were overwhelming. But in that moment, Sarah decided she would honor her grandmother's memory by being strong and resilient. One night, the discomfort became unbearable. Sarah was in the kitchen trying to prepare something to eat when a wave of dizziness hit her. Everything went dark for a moment, and she clung to the countertop to keep from falling. She felt cold sweat on her forehead and the world spinning around her. Desperate, she tried to take deep breaths, but the feeling of faintness didn't pass. Suddenly, the kitchen door swung open and Michael rushed in, concerned. "Sarah, what happened?" She could barely speak, her lips trembling with weakness. I don't know. Everything's spinning." Michael didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms and carried her to the car, driving quickly to the hospital. During the ride, Sarah closed her eyes, trying to focus on Michael's calming voice assuring her that everything would be okay. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed that Sarah's pregnancy was complicated by stress and malnutrition. She needed rest and constant care. The doctor was clear in saying she should avoid stressful situations, which seemed like a cruel irony considering everything she was going through. Michael stayed by her side throughout the consultation, holding her hand and offering words of support. He was a rock in a sea of turmoil, and Sarah felt grateful for his constant presence. But a dark shadow hung over that moment of temporary relief. John. He was still a real and constant threat. Sarah knew he would ignore the pregnancy, but at the same time, she feared what he might do if he decided to interfere. Sarah returned home from the hospital with Michael, feeling exhausted but determined. She looked at her grandmother's house now with new eyes. This would be the place where she would rebuild her life, where she would create a safe home for her baby. With Michael by her side, she began to believe that maybe there was a path to happiness, despite all the pain and betrayal. But doubt and fear still lingered, like shadows lurking in the corners of her mind. Every day was a battle to keep hope alive, to not succumb to the darkness threatening to engulf her spirit. The days following the hospital visit were tough for Sarah. Each morning felt like a battle to get out of bed, with the shadow of uncertainty and fear looming over her. Pregnancy was a mix of hope and constant worry, and the weight of responsibility she carried was almost more than she could bear. Michael, faithful and caring, stood by her side every step of the way. He made sure Sarah ate properly and encouraged her to rest as much as possible. His presence was an immense relief, a light in the darkness surrounding Sarah. But even with all the support, there were moments when she felt on the brink of despair. One afternoon, while Sarah tried to clean the future baby's room, a strong wave of dizziness hit her. The room began to spin, and she felt her legs give way. Trying to hold onto the wall, she ended up falling to her knees, breathing heavily. Panic set in. What if something happened to the baby? The mere idea was unbearable. Too weak to get up, Sarah began to call for Michael, her voice weak and full of fear. Michael! Michael, help me! He appeared almost instantly, his eyes wide with concern. Sarah, what happened? He knelt beside her, holding her face in his hands. I don't feel well. Everything's spinning, she murmured, tears of frustration and fear streaming down her face. Michael scooped her up without hesitation and carried her to the living room couch. He rushed to get a glass of water and a damp towel, trying to calm her. It's going to be okay, Sarah. Just take deep breaths. As Sarah tried to catch her breath, Michael called the doctor, describing the situation urgently. The doctor recommended that Sarah be taken to the hospital again, just to ensure that everything was okay with her and the baby. Michael helped Sarah to her feet, and together they went to the hospital. The journey was tense, with Sarah fighting against the sense of despair threatening to overwhelm her. Upon arrival, she was immediately taken to an examination room. Michael stayed by her side, holding her hand tightly, as the doctors conducted the necessary tests. After a long wait, the doctor returned with a reassuring smile. Sarah, the baby is fine. You need to rest more and avoid any kind of stress. The relief was so great that Sarah almost broke down in tears. Thank you, doctor, she said, her voice still trembling. Michael helped her back home, and on the way he spoke softly. You need to take care of yourself, Sarah. You're not alone in this. I'm here with you and we'll get through this together. Those words were a balm to Sarah's heart. She felt a deep gratitude for Michael, a feeling that was beginning to mix with something more. But the fear of getting hurt again prevented her from fully acknowledging these new feelings. That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah thought about the future. The weight of responsibility and fear was still there, but there was a new spark of hope. Michael was a safe harbor in the storm, someone she could trust. However, John's shadow still loomed, and Sarah knew she couldn't let her guard down. The following weeks were ones of adjustment and growth. Sarah began to take better care of herself, following the doctor's recommendations. Michael continued to be her constant support, helping her prepare the house and ensuring she had everything she needed. Their friendship blossomed, and with it, a new hope emerged in Sarah's heart. But deep in her mind, John's presence was a looming threat. What would he do when he found out about the baby? How could Sarah protect her child and herself from the clutches of her ex-husband? The days following the hospital were tough for Sarah. Each morning felt like a battle to get out of bed, with the shadow of uncertainty and fear looming over her. Pregnancy was a blend of hope and constant worry, and the weight of the responsibility she carried was almost more than she could bear. One morning, Sarah woke up feeling a sharp pain in her abdomen. She tried to ignore it, thinking it might just be a passing ache, but the intensity increased with each passing minute. Scared, she called out for Michael, who promptly took her to the hospital. As they waited for the doctor, Sarah held onto Michael's hand tightly, her eyes welling up with tears. "What if something's wrong with the baby?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Michael squeezed her hand tighter, trying to convey reassurance. "It's going to be okay, Sarah. We're here, and we'll get through this together." Finally, the doctor arrived and took her to the examination room. Every minute felt like an eternity as Sarah awaited the results. The physical pain was bearable compared to the emotional torment she felt. When the doctor returned, the expression on his face was serious. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said calmly. "The pain you're experiencing is concerning. We need to do some more tests to ensure everything's okay with the baby." Sarah's world crumbled once again. She could barely breathe, fear paralyzing every rational thought. As the tests were conducted, she felt like a puppet, with no control over her body or her destiny. When the doctor returned with the results, there was a palpable tension in the air. "Sarah, we have good news and bad news. The good news is that the baby is fine, but you need to rest much more than you were. Any additional stress could be very dangerous." The news relieved some of the pressure she felt, but the warning of imminent danger brought back all the anxiety. She nodded, promising to follow all the doctor's recommendations more rigorously. Back home, Michael did everything in his power to make the environment more peaceful and comfortable for Sarah. But John's shadow continued to haunt her thoughts. Sarah knew he would ignore the pregnancy, but she feared he might do something to further disrupt her life. One night, while Michael was preparing dinner, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was her sister, the traitor who had stolen her husband. The voice on the other end of the line was cold and calculating. "Sarah, I know about the baby. John does too. And he wants to talk." Panic seized Sarah. She could barely believe her sister's cruelty. "I have nothing to say to you both," she replied firmly, trying to control the tremor in her voice. "He's coming over, Sarah. Be prepared," her sister said before abruptly hanging up. Sarah felt panic rising. Her heart pounded uncontrollably as she told Michael what had just happened. He hugged her, promising he wouldn't let anyone hurt her. But Sarah knew John's presence would bring new problems and more suffering. The next day, John showed up at the door, his face twisted with anger. "We need to talk, Sarah." Michael stood by her side, his protective hand on her shoulder. "She doesn't want to talk to you, John. You've done enough." John ignored Michael and approached Sarah. "You think you can push me away like this? I'm the father of this baby, and I'll do whatever it takes to stay close to him." Sarah felt panic rising again, but also a deep anger. "You lost that right when you cheated on me and kicked me out of the house, John. I won't let you hurt my child." The argument escalated, with John trying to force his way in and Michael acting as a shield. Sarah watched, feeling helpless, tears of frustration and fear streaming down her face. Finally, Michael managed to make John back off, threatening to call the police. John left, but not before casting a hateful glance at Sarah. "This isn't over, Sarah. You'll regret this." As the door closed, Sarah collapsed into Michael's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Every encounter with John seemed to bring more pain and uncertainty. She knew she would need to be stronger than ever, not just for herself, but for the child she carried. Michael comforted her, but the sense of constant danger was always present. Every day was a struggle to maintain sanity, find strength, and protect her child's future. And as the battle continued, Sarah wondered how much more suffering she could endure before hope finally triumphed over despair. The following days were a constant struggle for Sarah. The fear of what John might do kept her in a constant state of alert. Every small sound at night made her heart race. Every unanswered call brought a new wave of panic. But despite it all, there was a glimmer of light in her life: Michael. Michael was always around, offering not only physical but also emotional support. He seemed to understand her pains without her needing to say a word, and his constant presence was a balm to Sarah's wounded heart. He helped her organize the house, brought supplies, and above all was there to listen to her. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, Sarah began to open up more. "Did you know my grandmother loved roses?" she said as she planted some seedlings. "She would spend hours out here tending to them. I always thought it was just a hobby, but now I see it was more than that. It was a way to find peace." Michael smiled, wiping the dirt off his hands. "It seems like you're doing the same now." Maybe in some way she's here with you, helping you find that peace. Sarah looked at Michael, feeling a wave of gratitude. You've been amazing, Michael. I don't know what I would do without you here. Michael approached and lightly touched her shoulder. You're stronger than you think, Sarah. I'm here to remind you of that whenever you need it. As the days passed, the bond between them strengthened. Michael accompanied her to every doctor's appointment, helped plan the baby's room, and most importantly, was always willing to listen to her fears and concerns. Every small gesture, every encouraging smile, made Sarah feel like she wasn't alone. But peace never lasted long. One night, while having dinner, Sarah received a message from John. I'm still watching you. This isn't over. The veiled threat made her tremble. Michael noticed the immediate change in her demeanor. What's wrong? Sarah showed him the message, tears welling up in her eyes. He won't leave me alone. No matter what I do, he'll always be there, haunting my life. Michael picked up the phone and without hesitation called the police, reporting the threat. You need a restraining order against him, Sarah. This can't continue. As they waited for the police to arrive, Sarah felt a mixture of fear and relief. Fear of what John might do, but relief at having Michael by her side, willing to fight for her. When the officers arrived, she told them everything, from the betrayal to the constant threats. They advised her on the steps to obtain the restraining order and promised to monitor the situation closely. After the police left, Sarah felt exhausted, as if every word had drained her strength. Michael hugged her, whispering words of comfort. You're not alone, Sarah. We'll get through this together. That night, as she tried to sleep, Sarah reflected on Michael's unconditional support. He was more than a friend. He was a savior in her personal storm. She was still terrified of John, but she knew that with Michael by her side, she had a chance to find peace and safety. But the darkness still lurked in her mind. Each new day brought the promise of an imminent confrontation with John, and the fear that he might harm the baby was constant. Sarah knew she needed to be strong, not just for herself, but for the child she carried. The fight was far from over, and the road ahead would be filled with obstacles and suffering. Michael was her anchor, but she knew that true strength had to come from within. And as she looked into the darkness of the room, she felt a small flame of determination grow. She wouldn't let John win. No matter how much she suffered, she would protect her child and build a new life, one where John's shadow couldn't reach her. The days that followed were a mix of fear and hope for Sarah. Michael's constant presence brought an indescribable comfort, but John's threat never seemed to fade. Every unexpected sound, every shadow in the night, made her tremble with apprehension. And this constant tension was beginning to affect her health, something that worried both Michael and the doctor who was treating her. One afternoon, Sarah was sitting in the garden, trying to distract herself with a book, when she heard heavy footsteps approaching. Her heart raced. She looked up and saw John coming closer, his expression filled with anger and determination. Sarah, we need to talk now, he shouted, his voice laden with hostility. Sarah tried to stand up, but her legs were trembling. Michael, who was chopping wood on the other side of the house, heard the shouting and ran to her, positioning himself between Sarah and John. We've already told you that you're not welcome here, John. Leave now before I call the police. John laughed, a bitter and humorless sound. You think you can keep me away, Michael? This is between me and Sarah. I'm the father of this baby, and I have a right to be in its life. Sarah felt a wave of panic, John's words echoing in her mind like a sentence. You don't care about this baby, John. You just want to control me, keep hurting me, she said, her voice weak but full of conviction. Do you think you can push me away that easily, Sarah? I'll do whatever it takes to be near this baby, even if it means destroying your life, John replied, taking a menacing step toward her. Michael stood his ground, his eyes filled with controlled anger. You're not going to hurt Sarah anymore. I won't allow it. The tension in the air was palpable, a clash of wills that seemed ready to explode. John shot a look of hatred at Michael and then at Sarah. This isn't over, Sarah. I'll be back, and next time you won't be able to stop me. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving a sense of dread in the air. Sarah felt her legs give way and fell to her knees, her body trembling with relief and fear. Michael knelt beside her, holding her as tears streamed down her face. He's going to come back, Michael. I don't know how I'll be able to handle it, she whispered, her voice broken by fear. We'll find a way to stop John, Sarah. I won't let him hurt you or the baby, Michael replied, his voice full of determination. The days that followed were a hell of constant vigilance. Michael began taking measures to protect Sarah, installing security cameras around the house and making sure all doors and windows were locked. But the constant tension was taking its toll. Sarah began having nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night with stifled screams and cold sweat. One night, as she tried to sleep, Sarah had a vivid dream. In the dream, she was running through a field, trying to escape from John, who was chasing her with a look of pure malice. She could hear his cruel laughter getting closer, feeling despair growing inside her. Just as he was about to catch her, she woke up, panting and terrified. Michael was by her side, awakened by her screams. It was just a dream, Sarah. I'm here, it's okay, he said, trying to calm her down. Sarah nestled into his arms, feeling safe for the first time in days. I don't know what I would do without you, Michael. I'm so afraid of what he might do. You're stronger than you think, Sarah, and you're not alone. We'll get through this together, he replied, holding her tightly. But the battle was far from over. Each day brought a new wave of fear, a new threat. Sarah knew that the fight against John would be long and hard, but with Michael by her side, she was beginning to believe that she could find the strength to carry on. Sarah's suffering was intense and constant, a pain that seemed to accumulate endlessly. But between each tear, each moment of despair, there was a small spark of hope, fueled by Michael's love and support. And it was this spark that kept her fighting, believing that one day, she would find peace and happiness again. The days turned into a tense routine of constant vigilance and looming fear for Sarah. She felt like she was living in a state of continuous alertness, expecting John to reappear at any moment to wreak havoc in her life. Even with Michael by her side, the weight of the imminent threat was almost unbearable. One morning, Sarah woke up feeling nauseous and with a throbbing pain in her chest. She knew that stress was taking a toll on her, but she couldn't help but worry about the baby. As she tried to get up, she felt a dizzy spell and had to hold onto the edge of the bed to avoid falling. Michael, always alert, entered the room at that moment and found her pale and trembling. Sarah, what happened? Are you okay? She shook her head, tears starting to flow. I'm so tired, Michael. I'm so afraid of losing this baby. He hugged her tightly, trying to convey all the support and security he could. You're not going to lose the baby, Sarah. I promise we'll get through this together. Let's go to the doctor right away. At the hospital, the doctor ran several tests and confirmed that the baby was fine, but warned that Sarah needed absolute rest and, above all, to avoid any kind of stress. The doctor's recommendation seemed like an impossible mission given the circumstances. Back at home, Michael made the decision to further enhance security. He hired a specialized company to install an advanced alarm system and placed additional cameras around the property. He also started spending more time at home, working remotely to be always present and ready for any eventuality. Despite these precautions, John didn't give up. One night he showed up again, this time more aggressive and determined. He started banging on the windows, shouting threats and demanding to come in. Terrified, Sarah hid in the room while Michael confronted John once again. You're crossing all boundaries, John. Get out of here before I call the police, Michael said, his voice firm and filled with contained anger. I'm not going anywhere without talking to Sarah. She needs to understand that I'm the father of this baby and I have rights, John shouted, his presence becoming increasingly menacing. With no other option, Michael called the police. As they waited, the tension was palpable. Sarah was locked in the room, her heart racing, feeling cornered and helpless. She could hear John's shouts and the sound of Michael trying to keep him away. Every second felt like an eternity. When the police finally arrived, John was taken away, but not without making it clear that he would be back. This isn't over, Sarah. I'll be back, and next time you'll hear me, he shouted as he was escorted out. The momentary relief was replaced by profound exhaustion. Sarah collapsed into Michael's arms, feeling completely drained. I don't know how I can keep going like this, Michael. I'm so tired of living in fear. Michael stroked her hair, trying to calm her down. We'll find a way to end this, Sarah. I won't let him hurt you or our baby. Let's get a restraining order. Let's do whatever it takes. The following days were dedicated to that. With the help of a lawyer, they managed to obtain a restraining order against John. But Sarah knew that this wouldn't guarantee her total safety. His shadow still loomed over her life, like a storm about to burst at any moment. Nevertheless, Sarah's determination began to grow. Each day was a struggle, but with Michael by her side, she felt like she could face the challenges. She started seeking ways to strengthen herself, both physically and emotionally. She attended therapy sessions to deal with the trauma and found a support group of women who had gone through similar situations. Michael continued to be her rock, always by her side, helping her find the inner strength she thought she had lost. The connection between them deepened, every gesture of affection, every word of support, cementing the bond that was growing between them. The days turned into weeks, and Sarah and Michael's routine began to take on a semblance of fragile normalcy. The restraining order against John offered some relief, but the fear of his return never completely disappeared. Sarah knew that every day without a direct confrontation was a small victory, but the constant tension left deep marks on her mind and body. One afternoon, as Sarah sat on the porch, enjoying the gentle warmth of the sun, she felt the baby move for the first time. It was a moment of pure emotion, a reminder that, despite everything, there was a new life growing inside her. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she placed her hands on her belly, whispering a silent promise of protection and love. Michael, who was tending to the garden, noticed the change in Sarah's expression and approached. "Are you okay, Sarah?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. She looked at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of joy and fear. "The baby? I felt him move," she said, her voice trembling. Michael smiled, kneeling beside her and gently placing his hand on Sarah's belly. "That's amazing, Sarah. You're doing a wonderful job." They stayed like that for a few minutes, feeling the life growing inside Sarah, a moment of peace that seemed suspended in time. But soon reality imposed itself again. Visits to the lawyer to reinforce the restraining order continued, and each trip was a reminder of the threats that still loomed over them. During one of these visits, the lawyer suggested that perhaps Sarah and Michael should consider moving to a safer place where John couldn't easily find them. The idea of leaving the house that had belonged to her grandmother broke Sarah's heart, but she knew that the baby's safety was more important. Back at home, Sarah and Michael discussed the possibility of moving. "I know it's hard, Sarah, but maybe it's the best option," Michael said, trying to be practical. She nodded, although tears began to stream down her face. "I just wish things were different. I wish we could raise our baby here, in my grandmother's house." Michael hugged her, feeling her pain. "I know, Sarah. I know. But we'll find a place where we can be happy and safe. I promise we'll build new memories wherever we are." The decision was made. Sarah and Michael began looking for a new home, a place where they could start from scratch. During this process, the bond between them deepened even further. They spent nights discussing dreams and hopes, planning a future that had once seemed impossible. Each small step taken towards a new beginning brought a sense of renewal, but also sadness for what they were leaving behind. However, John's shadow didn't disappear. During the last visit to the lawyer, they were informed that John was contesting the restraining order, claiming to have rights over the baby. The news was a devastating blow to Sarah. She felt the ground open up beneath her feet, the sense of security she had just acquired disintegrating in seconds. Michael held her hand tightly as the lawyer explained the next legal steps. "We'll fight this, Sarah. We won't let him destroy us," Michael said, his voice firm, but with a tenderness that deeply touched Sarah's heart. Back at home, Sarah allowed herself to collapse into Michael's arms. "I don't know if I can go through this again, Michael. I'm so tired of fighting." He held her firmly, whispering words of comfort. "You're not alone, Sarah. We're in this together. And together, we'll overcome everything." Each challenge faced, each obstacle overcome, brought a new layer of resilience to Sarah. Michael's constant and loving presence was an unwavering pillar in her life. He helped her see the strength within herself, a strength she didn't even know she possessed. As the legal battle against John continued, Sarah and Michael began to glimpse a future together, not only as friends and allies, but as something deeper and more meaningful. With each shared moment, their love grew, silent but strong, like a plant blossoming amidst chaos. The decision to move to a new house brought a brief glimmer of hope for Sarah and Michael. The search for a new home became a joint project, something that distracted Sarah from the constant tension and fear. However, deep down, she knew that John wouldn't give up so easily. One night, while Sarah was sorting through boxes for the move, she felt a sharp twinge of pain in her abdomen. She tried to brush it off, thinking it was just built-up stress, but the pain only worsened. Michael, noticing the paleness in Sarah's face, insisted that she sit down and rest. "Sarah, you need to rest. Let me take care of these things," he said, concern evident in his voice. She nodded, feeling guilty for being a burden. "Sorry, Michael. I just want all of this to be over soon." Later that night, when the house was shrouded in silence, a disturbing sound woke Sarah. She heard footsteps outside and muffled voices. Panic washed over her. She knew John was there. Michael, already awake and alert, grabbed the phone to call the police. "Stay here, Sarah. I'll see what's going on." Sarah felt her heart race uncontrollably as Michael descended the stairs. She heard the sounds of a struggle, furniture being overturned, and the unmistakable sound of John's furious voice. "You think you can keep me away from my family?" John screamed. "I'll finish you off and take what's mine." Sarah, unable to stay still, descended the stairs despite the pain and fear. When she reached the bottom of the staircase, she saw Michael trying to restrain John, both engaged in a fierce struggle. John managed to break free for a moment and approached Sarah, pure rage in his eyes. "You're going to pay for this, Sarah," he threatened, advancing towards her. Before he could lay a hand on her, Michael intervened once more, managing to bring John down to the ground. The police arrived shortly after, arresting John as he screamed and thrashed, promising revenge. Sarah, in shock, fell to her knees, her breathing rapid and uncontrolled. Michael rushed to her, fear and concern written all over his face. "Sarah, are you okay? We need to get you to the hospital." At the hospital, doctors confirmed that the extreme stress was putting the pregnancy at risk. Sarah would need intensive care to ensure the baby's safety. Sitting in the hospital bed, with Michael by her side holding her hand, she felt a mix of relief and fear. "I can't live like this anymore, Michael. I can't put our baby in danger because of John," she whispered, tears freely flowing. Michael hugged her, his voice filled with determination. "We'll move as soon as you're out of here. We'll go somewhere he'll never find us. I promise, Sarah." The following days were tough. Sarah remained in the hospital under observation, each visit from Michael bringing a bit of comfort. The constant fear for the baby was a crushing weight, but Michael's presence gave her unexpected strength. Finally, Sarah was discharged. Michael had found a new house in a remote and secure location, far from John's reach. The move was swift and intense, but it brought a sense of renewal. As they unloaded the last boxes in the new house, Sarah felt a breeze of hope for the first time in a long while. The new house was small but cozy. Michael made sure to set everything up so that Sarah felt safe and comfortable. During the first night, as they sat together on the couch, Sarah looked at Michael, feeling a deep and growing love. "Michael, I don't know how I would have survived all of this without you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. He smiled, holding her hand tenderly. "We're a team, Sarah. We always will be." But even in the new house, John's shadow didn't completely vanish. The fear was still there, though more distant. Sarah knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a real chance to build a new and happy life. Sarah and Michael's new home, though simple, offered a peace they hadn't experienced in a long time. The house was nestled in a rural area, surrounded by fields and trees, a perfect refuge away from John's threats. As the days passed, the routine began to stabilize, and the tension that had dominated Sarah's life started to diminish. Despite the relief, the shadow of past traumas still loomed over her. At night, when everything was quiet, Sarah often found herself reliving moments of fear and pain. However, Michael's constant and reassuring presence was a beacon in the darkness. He was always by her side, holding her hand, offering words of comfort, and ensuring she wasn't alone. One night, while they were sitting on the porch, gazing at the stars, Michael noticed that Sarah was particularly silent. He approached and placed his hand over hers. "Are you okay, Sarah?" She looked at him, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "It's hard, Michael. Even here where we're safe, I feel like I can't help but look over my shoulder, expecting something bad to happen." Michael gently squeezed her hand. "I understand, Sarah. We've been through a lot. But we're in this together. and I won't let anything hurt you again." Sarah smiled, though a solitary tear rolled down her cheek. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Michael. I don't know how I would have managed without you." They sat in silence for a few moments, simply enjoying each other's company. Then Michael stood up and knelt in front of her, holding both of Sarah's hands. The unexpected gesture made her heart race. "Sarah, I have something important to say. I know we've been through extremely tough times, but those times have also shown me something wonderful. I love you, Sarah. I love your strength, your courage, and everything you are. And I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, building a life together." Sarah was speechless, her heart beating fast. Tears now freely streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of joy. "Oh, Michael, I love you too, so much that it hurts sometimes. You've been my anchor, my light in the darkness. I can't imagine my life without you." They hugged, an embrace full of promises and emotions. In that moment, all the pain and fear seemed to vanish, replaced by a feeling of love and renewed hope. It was as if, finally, the storm had passed, and a new dawn was breaking. From that moment on, Sarah and Michael began to plan their future together more clearly. They talked about the baby, about creating a home filled with love and security. Every decision made was a step towards a new life, a life they were determined to protect and cherish. But even as they planned this bright future, they knew the past could still cast its shadows. The battle against John was far from over, and he could still try to interfere. However, together Sarah and Michael felt they could face anything. The love they shared was their greatest strength, a strength that nothing could destroy. The legal process continued, but now Sarah was stronger, more determined to protect her new family. With Michael by her side, she faced each challenge with renewed courage. And although obstacles still arose, each one overcome was a testament to the power of love and resilience. The following months were a mix of joy and challenge for Sarah and Michael. Sarah's pregnancy progressed smoothly, but the fear of John still loomed like a constant shadow. However, with every movement of the baby, she felt a renewed determination to protect her child and the future she was building with Michael. One afternoon, as they were organizing the baby's room, Sarah found herself admiring the tenderness with which Michael worked. He painted the walls with a soft blue, softly humming a lullaby. The simple act of preparing that space for their child filled Sarah with deep emotion and overwhelming love for Michael. "Michael, do you really think we're safe here?" Sarah asked, her voice slightly trembling as she placed small stuffed animals on the shelves. Michael paused what he was doing and turned to her, a serious look in his eyes. "Sarah, I know the past few months have been difficult, but I believe we're safe here. We'll do everything to protect our family. John won't find us." She nodded, trying to convince herself of Michael's reassuring words. But deep down, the fear persisted. Sarah knew she needed to confront this fear and live fully, but the past traumas had left deep scars. During one of Sarah's routine medical checkups, her doctor mentioned the proximity of the due date. "Everything is going well, Sarah. The baby is healthy. You just need to keep taking care of yourself and avoid stress." The mention of stress made Sarah swallow hard. She knew that despite all the care, the emotional stress of dealing with John and the constant threats was still a reality. But with Michael by her side, she felt like she could face anything. One night, while they were lying in bed, Sarah felt a wave of anxiety. Michael, noticing her discomfort, pulled her closer. "Sarah, what's going on? You're so quiet." She sighed, trying to find the right words. "I'm scared, Michael. Scared that John will find a way to hurt us. Scared that I won't be able to protect our baby." Michael cupped her face in his hands, his eyes locked onto hers. "Sarah, you're the strongest person I know. We've been through so much, and yet here we are together. We won't let him destroy us. We'll protect our baby, and we'll build a happy life." His words brought immediate comfort, and Sarah allowed herself to relax into Michael's arms, feeling the love and security he offered. The connection between them was a constant source of strength. But the true test of their resilience was still to come. One morning, while they were preparing breakfast, they received a call from their lawyer. "Sarah, Michael, I have good news. We've reached a legal agreement that prevents John from having any contact with you. The restraining order has been strengthened, and he's being closely monitored." The news brought immense relief, but Sarah couldn't help feeling a twinge of doubt. "Does this mean he won't be able to threaten us anymore?" she asked, trying to hold on to hope. It means he'll have a very hard time doing so, the lawyer replied. But you still need to be cautious. The following days were filled with a newfound lightness. Sarah and Michael allowed themselves to dream again, to plan the future without the constant fear of an imminent threat. They spent more time together, laughing and enjoying the little moments, like assembling the crib and choosing the baby's name. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden, Sarah stopped and placed her hand on her belly. Michael, I feel like we're finally nearing a fresh start. Our baby will grow up in a place filled with love and security. Michael smiled and placed his hand over hers. Yes, Sarah. And I'll be here for every step of that journey. Let's create a wonderful life together. The day of the delivery was fast approaching, and Sarah felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. Michael was always by her side, offering comfort and support. But a part of Sarah was still trapped in a cycle of fear and anxiety. John's shadow, though more distant, still haunted her. On the morning Sarah went into labor, a storm raged outside, reflecting the storm of emotions within her. Michael took her to the hospital, holding her hand tightly as she battled through contractions. Each physical pain seemed to echo the emotional pain she had carried for so long. In the hospital, time seemed to drag on. Sarah was exhausted but determined. Michael's words and his constant presence by her side were like anchors, keeping her steady amidst the turmoil. When the moment finally arrived, she focused on every breath, every push, feeling the life she was bringing into the world. And then, with one final effort, the baby's cry filled the room. Sarah felt a wave of relief and pure joy. The baby was placed in her arms, and she looked at that tiny face, feeling overwhelming love and fierce protection. Michael, by her side, had tears in his eyes. His face lit up with a smile of absolute happiness. He's perfect, Sarah, Michael whispered, kissing her forehead. We did it. Holding her son, Sarah felt all her struggles and pains culminate in that moment of pure emotion. Tears flowed freely, a mixture of joy, relief, and a profound sense of accomplishment. I couldn't have done this without you, Michael. Our baby is here, safe and loved. The days that followed were filled with pure happiness. Sarah and Michael devoted themselves to the baby, every little moment becoming a precious treasure. They named him Ethan, a symbol of hope and renewal. But even amidst the joy, Sarah knew she needed to face one last thing. She needed to completely free herself from the fear of John, and to do that she needed to confront him, even if symbolically. With Michael's support, Sarah decided to write a letter to John. She knew she could never fully forgive him for what he had done, but she needed to find a way to move forward. She wrote about the pain he had caused, about the fear and suffering, but also about her determination to protect her child and build a happy life. She explained that, despite everything, she had found the strength to forgive herself and move on, something he could never take away from her. Sending the letter was an act of liberation. Sarah felt like a heavy weight had been lifted off her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she felt a true sense of peace. As time passed, Sarah and Michael settled into their new life with Ethan. Each day was a new adventure, full of challenges and joys. And while Sarah still had moments of insecurity, she knew that with Michael by her side, she could face anything. One night, as they put Ethan to bed, Michael took Sarah's hand and led her to the porch. I have a surprise for you, he said, his eyes shining with anticipation. He knelt down and pulled out a small box from his pocket. Sarah, you've brought light into my life, even in the darkest moments. You're the most amazing woman I've ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she looked at Michael, feeling pure and complete happiness. Yes, Michael. 1,000 times yes.